Hey guys! As most of you know, I've been studying foreign language for quite some time. When I was pretty young, I learned some basics of Spanish, and then I studied it in university, and recently I've been doing a lot of private language study just on my own. And I think as I've gotten older and I've traveled more and I've met more people, I've continuously realized more and more just how important and wonderful it is to learn another language. So today I'm going to share with you just a few of my reasons for why you should learn a second language. We're going to start pretty practical. For the first one, it's very useful to know a foreign language for traveling and for work. There are a lot of jobs obviously that don't require knowing a foreign language. You don't ever need to use one, but it's becoming more and more common for that to set you apart from your peers, especially if the job includes any type of travel or interactions with international business or anything like that. So of course, as time goes on, this is going to become more and more of a requirement for more jobs. For people who of course don't need this for their employment, it's also very useful just when you travel. English speakers have it pretty easy when it comes to travel a lot of times because English is pretty easy to find. And that's not just for English speakers, it's because English is a very international language. But naturally, native English speakers can benefit from this because it's our native language, so we understand it really well, ideally. That being said, if you travel a lot, there are going to be plenty of moments when you don't find anyone who speaks English. Or in the case of native speakers of other languages, you won't find anyone who speaks your native language. In those circumstances, having another language in your belt, especially if it's the language of the country that you're visiting, is extremely helpful. Even if that language is not the language of the country you're visiting, if it's another common language like Spanish, like French, like Chinese, like very commonly spoken languages, you'll have an easier time finding somebody who might speak one of those as well. So now that we've covered the most practical reason for learning a language, number 2, you learn so much about your own native language when you learn another language. I'm studying French and Spanish, which are both Latin-based languages, so they have a lot of ties to English. So of course, in that way, that definitely helps me understand my own language and where things come from as well. Even more than that, if you learn a language that's completely different, take Mandarin, take Russian, take anything that is not Latin or Germanic based, so therefore not very similar to English, still learning this other way of communicating makes you question things from your own language and makes you realize things that are completely natural to you until you start thinking about them a little more. You start considering, why do we say it like that? Why do we express ourselves that way? You'll also find lots of times when words just won't translate. You want to say something in your native language and there's just literally no way of expressing that in the same way in the other language. Nothing will quite kind of pack the punch that your native language will, and you can't say it and you want to say it and you don't know how. And the opposite thing happens as well. You'll learn about a word or an expression and it's just so hard to understand sort of what that's expressing because there's no equivalent in your language. This opens up such a wonderful and new world of communication and expression. The third reason I think you should study a foreign language is because you can learn about another culture in a much different way. Learning the language not only gives you the access to actually studying materials written for people of this native language, which often have a different tone and a slightly different cultural influence, but also there's a lot of culture just contained in the language that you don't even realize if all you ever speak is your native language. You learn a lot about traditions and holidays and mindsets and things when you learn the actual language that they speak. A lot of this also comes from expressions. Sometimes the easiest way to express something simple in your native language is through an expression in that language, especially if you're going to communicate with native speakers. You have to know a lot of phrases and expressions. And a lot of the slang is derived from how that culture works. It's amazing how much more open-minded and well-rounded learning a language can make you in that way. Just seeing how people live and think in a way that's so unlike what you've grown up in is amazing. That makes you question and appreciate your own culture a lot more. The next reason to learn a second language is because it helps you develop a lot of confidence. There is nothing more difficult and potentially embarrassing than trying to express yourself in a different language, especially when you're not really that confident yet in that language. There's a very high likelihood that you'll use the wrong word or that you won't have the right words to express yourself. You know when you have to give a speech in front of people or when you have to go into a job interview and it sometimes seems like all words escape you and they just all of a sudden you have nothing in your brain? It's even more when you're speaking a foreign language. You don't have nearly the amount of vocabulary and intuitive understanding of the language if it's not the one you grew up speaking. And because of that, it's a lot harder to communicate. I'm not gonna lie to you, it can be absolutely terrifying. This is something I've had to work with a lot more because despite the fact that I've been learning languages for a very large part of my life, I haven't tried as much to actually communicate, especially in-person speaking, with native speakers. In the past year or two, I've pushed myself a lot more to do that. And because of that, I've seen a lot of progress in my confidence when I'm speaking a foreign language and my confidence when I'm just speaking my own language. And that confidence that you build up as you're learning a foreign language can be transferred and used in other skills in your life, not even just language or arts or any of that. And this kind of leads into the next reason, which is that it's very good for your brain. Obviously, there's lots of science to back this up. People have done multiple studies on learning a foreign language, on bilingual people, trilingual bilingual, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into all of that. If you're curious, you can just Google it. It's pretty easy to find. But I will tell you from my personal experience and from the experiences of my friends and people that I've talked to, it's real. It's much more than just a chart. It helps your analytical skills. It helps your improvisational skills. It helps your memorization skills. Learning Spanish as an English speaker is not the same as going to your English classes where they teach you basics of your own language. It's completely different. Of course, it uses a lot of those same skills and it can strengthen those skills, but there is so much more at play when you're trying to learn a whole new set of rules plus vocabulary. You have a whole new set of ideas to get your brain wrapped around and to analyze. In addition to that, of course, there is also some plain memorization. Especially when you're first starting a language, there's going to be a lot of stuff that, to put it simply, you just have to remember. And building up those memory skills in language classes also means that your memory skills will be stronger in general. And perhaps most of all, it helps you think on your feet a lot more. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with developing your confidence and your ability to improvise and work with a small set of vocabulary and understanding. In your native language, you have this much, like everybody else. In your new language, you start with this much, and then it slowly grows, and it probably will take you your entire life if you ever want to get even close to this, and you still probably will never be like a native speaker. So that means because you're working with a lot less, if you think it's hard to find a word in your native language, it's gonna be even harder to find it within this tiny little bit that you have in the new language. And that means that you're gonna get really good at thinking on your feet and working with the tools that you have. And as a bonus tip, just to round off this list, learning a new language can help you find opportunities and possibilities that you might never have even realized were there. It can help you make new friends and talk to people who you never would have had the opportunity to communicate with if you didn't know a different language. I know everybody has different interests and different curiosities, but when you look at the amount of cultures there are to study and languages there are to choose from, I think it's so important that you find at least one that interests you. Whatever your inspiration behind learning a language is, and whatever language you choose to study, I think you'll find pretty quickly that the experience is really amazing, and you're not going to regret it. I hope this video wasn't super long. I have a feeling it's going to be. Let me know in the comments what language or languages have you learned, and which one or ones do you want to learn. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.